contend with. So we're really excited that you've joined us. We've had a great, I think, academic year of these learning labs, and it's been fantastic to connect with all of these community partners that we have at Teaching Cleveland a relationship with. So, and we're extremely excited to have the Fund for Economic Future here and Bradford Davy, who worked with our Teaching Cleveland Student Challenge a couple years ago. And we've asked the fund to come back because when, as you'll find out, when we talk about trying to have kids understand complex issues in Northeast Ohio, whether it is combined with history or economics or public policy, actually having it broken down for kids is a key piece. And so we're actually going to talk not only about what the fund does, but also about that process of breaking down these very large issues, these very complex issues around Northeast Ohio, and what it might mean for how we approach it in the classroom. So Bradford, we really appreciate you being here. All of our guests, we appreciate you joining us here for this learning lab. And we're going to have Bradford speak for a while, then we'll have a conversation, then we'll take some questions at the end. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Bradford.
Terrific. And can y'all see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Terrific. I'm going to go into a larger view. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Bradford Davey. I'm the Director of Regional Engagement at the Fund for Economic Future. You know, as I was preparing for this conversation, I was just thinking about when I was a student and all of the things I would tell my teachers that I wanted to go do. I want to go be a lobbyist on K Street. And I realized, like, so rarely do we talk about like what these jobs actually mean, right? Like, what do you actually do every day? And so it was really with this thought that I came into this presentation, this conversation tonight. You know, first off, first I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. Then I'll briefly explain a problem that we're thinking a lot about. And then I'll really spend some time breaking down our process in trying to solve that problem. Does that sound okay? Is that why we're here? Cool. So, you know, at the fund, I've been saying that we've seen the future and it's resident owned. And the exciting part is that others have seen it too. There's a national movement that is growing around community ownership of real estate assets and of business and of property. And so, you know, we think that the future of not only Northeast Ohio, but the United States is resident ownership. So, you know, first, who is the fund? What do we do? I'll keep this brief. You know, we're a funding alliance made up of 40-some organizations and individuals working to advance economic growth and access to opportunity in Northeast Ohio. We call it growth and opportunity. To achieve it, we do a couple of things. We do grant making, right? So we give out cash for projects, but unlike other traditional philanthropies, we're not really focused on intermediate programs. We're thinking about long-term systemic change. We also do research. And we also do some convening. But when we think about all of that work, it's all really applied. So we want to make sure that we can use our research to advance actual things. And so, you know, we do that on behalf of our members across 18 counties, but we call Cleveland home. And one of the problems that we're really looking to address, one of the things that, you know, matters quite a bit to us is the racial wealth gap. So the racial wealth gap in the United States is 10 times, right? So the net worth of a white family is 10 times greater than that of a Black family in the United States. And look, there's a lot of reasons why. Wealth inequality as a result of disparities in wages, results in disparities in education, obviously racism that precludes and prevents people from opportunity. But it's also a result of low levels of valuation and undervaluation of assets in Black communities. And we think that this is really compounded because communities of color are excluded from development decisions. So, if you own less property and you're making less economic decisions for your neighborhood, you're feeling disenfranchised, and this racial wealth gap is exacerbated. And so we think that there's a real urgency to fix this. And there's so many ways, right? We can beef up education. We can address the wage gap. But one of the ways that we've wanted to attack this problem is to really increase the value that Black minority residents are receiving in the appreciation of their neighborhoods. Like, how can we make sure that they capture the growth of the places that they live? And we think that low-income communities really need intermediaries or bridge structures that meet people in their neighborhoods to make investments they can afford in the places that they live. It's a quote from our good friend Elwood Hopkins, a senior fellow at the Kresge Foundation, a personal mentor to me and someone who's really helped me along this journey in trying to build what we are going to be calling community investment funds. So sort of buried the header there, but community investment funds are these bridge structures, right? They encompass really a myriad of legal entities, everything from real estate investment trusts, which you might be invested in your 401ks, to opportunity zones, to pooled income funds, charitable loans. Maybe you and some friends have an investment club. All we're really talking about is pooling community dollars, right, to invest in real estate. So if we kind of take this example on the left side, we see a group of residents who put together some of their dollars to purchase a real estate asset, right? To purchase this building. A tenant, maybe a local business, fills that building. The rents are taken out, and then they're given out in shares or in dividends to the initial resident investor, right? It comes in a lot of forms, land trust. There's a whole bunch of these things that we've seen before, but we've never really seen them happen at scale. And there's a reason for that, right? There's real gaps in the ecosystem that limit adoption, right? So it's not for a want of trying. Sometimes there's a lack of expertise on the ground in neighborhoods. Sometimes organizations who are well aligned to do this and carry this out don't have the capacity. Sometimes there's organizations that could land a real estate investment trust in a neighborhood, but simply don't have the trust of the community to knock on doors and say, hey, you want to invest in this crazy thing down the road? And then look, there's money and there's exclusion. So there's reasons that these things haven't been scaled. And that's what we hope to address. We want to give every resident in Northeast Ohio the opportunity to own a piece of their neighborhood's appreciation. And I think I have an idea on how to do it. And so here's the problem as we see it. On the left, you have all of these tools and these structures. Trust Neighborhood, NICO, these are service providers. They've stood up these type of vehicles in other parts of the country, right? They're service providers. And then you have these tools that I've mentioned, REITs, land trusts. And then on the right side, you have these neighborhoods that are hungry or interested or really, really well aligned to accept or grow one of these tools or these service providers on the left. But what's missing is that sort of missing middle, right? Because in between that, you need things like grants to get started. You need investment capital to purchase the original asset in the building. Sometimes we just need some technical assistance to understand, what are we even talking about? Brad, you're talking about REITs. What is a REIT? How do you do that? You need some TA. Sometimes we need some research. We need to understand the neighborhood demographics and the profile of residents to understand how they might want to interact with an investment vehicle. Sometimes you need some national experts just to pat you on the back and say, you're on the right track, keep going. And then you might need someone to matchmake, to say, Huff, your neighborhood is not appreciating fast enough to become a REIT. There's not enough growth in your real estate prices, but what you would be great for is a land trust. And so, how can my organization help navigate this sort of treacherous, unclear system? And that's really where this conversation will turn. This is a conversation that I had with myself and a dear friend of mine, Ricardo Leone, the executive director of Metro West Community Development Corporation, which covers Stockyards, Clark-Fulton, the Brooklyn Center neighborhood. Ricardo and I are graduate school buddies. We sat in spatial economics class, questioning, what we were going to do with our lives and if this was even applicable. And a few years later, we were lucky enough to land at some pretty great organizations. And we met one day and we said, what is the crazy idea that what do you want to do? And how has it worked and how hasn't it? And he said to me, I want to create a REIT, right? I want to create a REIT in my neighborhood because Clark-Fulton and Stockyards is growing so quickly that I'm afraid that, my family and my friends aren't going to be able to live here anymore. And so we started with this concept of let's do it, right? Let's make this thing happen. And so about 8 months ago, we started that process. And so I'm going to walk you through in a really, it sounds kind of crazy and elementary, but this is the real way that we have started and now are working to scale this idea. And I hope it's applicable to your students and the way in which maybe you encourage them to break down problems. I tried to think back to the scientific method I was always bad at in elementary and high school and stuff. So this is probably a poor example, but I tried to make these languages translate. So the first thing we did was we wrote a concept paper. We just said, what is this place? And what is the problem? Really, what is it? And the real story behind this, because we're amongst friends and adults, is we tackled this problem the way any rational adult would. We went to the store, we bought a 6-pack of our favorite beers. We locked ourselves in an office at 7 o'clock on a Friday, and we said we're gonna write this paper. And 3 hours later, we emerged with a really rough draft of what we thought the problem was. There's 30,000 residents in the Metro West service area. It's the densest Latinx neighborhood in the state of Ohio. It's 38% Latinx, 18% Black. There's 1,300 vacant lots, right? So a lot of vacant property. But at the same time, there's $1 billion in investment in the pipeline in this neighborhood, right? So it butts up against Ohio City and Tremont. Home prices, there was homes that were selling for $15,000. And then in a matter of 6 months, we're selling for $46,000. And that trend has continued. You have the Metro Hospital neighborhood transformation plan where they're spending a ton of money and doing a ton of great work to build out their campus. And so, we landed on this concept paper that was this is great. This is awesome. This is going to be a healthy, vibrant community. And we want to make sure that the folks that have lived there and held down that neighborhood for their whole lives get to gain on that appreciation. And we think that the best way to do that is to buy some assets. And so we started out with some cornerstones. One, we wanted to make sure that shares could be philanthropically granted if people couldn't afford shares themselves. We wanted to make sure that it was commercial or industrial property because we wanted to see a growth of neighborhood businesses rather than just real estate. We also we wanted to make sure that the investments were small dollar, and we wanted to make sure that people wanted it. That if people said we do not understand nor care about this project, that we were always willing to walk away. And so we wrote that concept paper and we shopped it around the country. And then some people thought we were interesting and charming enough to try it out. And so we started to receive some help financially from some philanthropic supporters. And then the next step, we made an educated guess. we said like, wow, there's people who are really interested in this, and they're willing to give us their money. And so we should really think hard about what we need to do to make this project work. And so on the back of a napkin, literally on the back of the concept paper, we identified these 4 areas that we thought we would need to build this thing. We thought that we would need to select a structure, right? Like we knew that there was all these different kind of investment vehicles, but we didn't know which one we'd want to use. And so, you know, investment type, targeted return, tax implication, objectives, like someone else needed to help us figure out which structure that we needed to figure out which structure that we would want to use. We knew that we needed a coalition to do this, right? Because at the end of the day, we were going to be acquiring buildings. And so we didn't have enough money to do it ourselves. And we just didn't have the talent. Like we're pretty self-aware and self-assured, but we just didn't think that we had the know-how to do some of the stuff that we needed to do. And so we needed to build a team to help us do it. We also knew that we needed to engage residents, not just like to have them like tell us it was a good idea, but to do some real research on what they were capable of investing. And what they were willing to invest, and really do some ethnographic deep dives into like how this particular community thought about investment. And I'm in philanthropy, right? And so, you know, often we'll hear that like Black people don't participate in philanthropy, and what we absolutely know is that's not true. They think about philanthropic giving differently. It's closer to home. It's more personal. It's like, let's make sure that the first generation of our kids go to college. And so like, it's important that we did community engagement in a way that was authentic and culturally competent. And then like the place that we had the least knowledge was like real estate analysis. Like we were going to buy something. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't know. I don't even own my home, right? Like, we needed some real analysis, and some diligence around financial projections, pro forma, acquisition, underwriting. And so that's what we thought we needed. We needed those 4 things. That's certainly not all we needed, but that's the 4 things that we thought. So we started with just making some really rough educated guess and having people tell us we were right or wrong. And then we built a team. I called my friends, you know, from left to right, Mordecai Cargill, what a dude, right? This is one of the founders of Third Space Action Lab, a guy that I get to call my friend, my brother. Keisha Gonzalez, program officer from the Cleveland Foundation and resident of Clark-Fulton. Adam Briggs from Briggs Financial, a financial guy who can just like tell us how the market works. Alicia Washington from the Gun Foundation, program officer, another friend, and someone, you know, quite frankly, like, you know, Keisha and Alicia, like, they handle some dough. And I knew that I was going to have to hit my friends up for some money. And so I wanted to make sure that they were on the team. Neil is a resident and an investor in Clark-Fulton. In the bottom left, Elwood Hopkins, senior fellow at the Kresge Foundation. Candace from CNP, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. We always operated with the philosophy that this was not going to live at our home. We didn't think that it was going to live at the fund. We didn't think it was going to live at Metro West. It could live at CNP, right? It could live at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. And so we wanted to make sure that Candace was involved early. My friend Ricardo Leone, you know, central to all of this, wouldn't be happening without him. Brandon Bryant, the smartest guy in Cleveland, venture partner at Harlem Capital. Huge venture firm, focusing on Black entrepreneurs. And then Max Levin, the principal at Nico Real Estate Investment Company out of LA. And so I just called these folks and I was like, hey, I have this idea. I don't think I could do it without you. You're smarter than me. Do you want to sit on a panel to help build this thing? And I'm charming enough that they said, yeah. And so they have, and they helped us do a couple of things. They looked at these 4 pillars. And what I said was, look, I'm gonna write RFPs. I'm gonna write requests for proposals. and I'm going to send them out to people that I think can go do this work. I need you to read these RFPs and tell me why I'm wrong. And then when you tell me why I'm wrong, I'm going to fix the RFPs. I'm going to ask you who I send them to. I'm going to send them to those people. They're going to give me proposals back. I'm going to ask you to evaluate them. You're going to tell me why they're great. You're going to tell me why they suck. They did that, and we selected some people to help go do it. And then I committed to them a couple of things. One, I'm going to continue to share with you our progress, and you tell me if we're doing a good job or not. And then if you always tell me that I do a good job, I'm going to ask you for money. And you should have said no earlier. So they've been a tremendous group of people to bounce ideas off of. And then the fourth step, we hired just really smart people. We just hired people smarter than me, smarter than Ricardo, and are just really capable in the spaces that they're in. So for the real estate analysis, we hired Nico, the neighborhood investment company out of Echo Park. They built the first non-accredited real estate investment trust in the country. Their job is to figure out the ROI for the investments, understand acquisition targets, do a survey, do the due diligence, do the underwriting. Just give me 5 buildings that I need to buy, Max and Nico team. We hired Seventh Hill, David Jerka, a principal out of Cleveland, to do our community engagement. So they're going to do Cafe Con Leche events with 200 to 300 Clark-Fulton residents, to get a sense of like how they think about investments. And then they're going to build an investment persona that says, here's 7 different user personas in Clark-Fulton. These are the folks and the type of folks, sort of taxonomy of people that you're going to interact with. And this is how you should build this sort of project for them. And then we also on his team is a researcher from the University of Michigan who focuses on ethnographic research to think about how immigrant populations think about investment and how we communicate that across cultural competencies. And then, how do we also just make sure that the language barrier is overcome. There's also a team 3x3 out of New York that's helping project manage this whole thing because I do other things as well. Coalition, I kind of just talked through that. Legal structure, hired a team, one guy out of LA and Southern California, his name is Brett Heger from Gunduzi and Heger. They're helping us do a research project on which legal structure, sort of which process would be best for us to select based on some of those things that I described earlier. So they're going to do all the legal work to tell me, hey, based on some of the things that you're hearing from the real estate analysis, based on some of the things that you're hearing from stakeholders, and based on some of the capital structures, we think that you should go with X or Y. And so that's our team. We kicked off a month ago. Max and his team are starting the real estate analysis. Our legal team is constantly in contact with Nico to kind of get updates on where they are. Seventh Hill has started their community engagement process. They've reached out to a couple of high-level stakeholders to build sort of resident lists. Our researchers from UMM are doing ethnographic research as we speak. And I meet with my project team, that coalition, just to let them know that we're working, quarterly. And so that's like truly where we are. Like we are in it, y'all. And so I wish I could give you some results. I wish I could tell you that I bought a building and you can come, to the cafe and, it's serving residents. I can't. But what I can tell you is, we started this project with very little idea of like what to do. And I think that that's one of the coolest things about it is like, we just said like, yeah, let's just get really dirty and throw some stuff against the wall and see what sticks. So that's it. That's it for me. I talked a lot, so I hope that was helpful.
Words, so many words. No, extremely helpful, very helpful. I guess what I'd love to do is just ask you a couple questions and then kind of take it to the floor. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Actually, you know what? I'm gonna switch that because I have a feeling that the content that you are discussing is new to a lot of our audience. So I wonder first if there are like content related questions, terms you needed defined, anything like that from the crowd that we could answer before we dig into the problem structure kind of conversation.
Sure, let's do it.
Anybody got questions? We all fully understand the problem at hand.
Just a quick question. I teach in New Tech West in Cleveland in one of the high schools, and is like Max Hayes involved in that? I know they're by the Clark-Fulton area. Are the schools involved in any of these conversations or?
Yeah, so there was a master planning effort that went on in the Clark-Fulton neighborhood to really assess like where the neighborhood is going, and schools were actually unsurprising, a big part of that, right?
Mhm.
At the moment, we're in the process of really thinking about where this might go, and at that point, I think that's where we start to drill down on like who's next door,
Right.
and who's really affected by this. And so at the moment, no. But in our analysis, it's like where this thing goes matters, and it changes things quite a bit.
Cool. I just to follow up, I think it's just great stuff. Like Max Hayes is a vocational school, and they do a big building construction program, and I'm always thinking like, what ways could they reinvest in the neighborhood, but fix the buildings up. A lot of buildings been falling down and just need some work. I know when they were on Detroit, Max Hayes, they would buy a house and try to kind of flip it, but I think that's kind of gone by the wayside. So I just thought that would be a great opportunity to have a school right in that neighborhood, where kids they live there. A lot of the kids come from the Clark-Fulton area.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, especially as we think about like what post sort of acquisition looks like and like what redevelopment of that place means.
Yeah.
Just thinking through like who's participating in that work is certainly something that we haven't thought about yet. Thanks.
Sure.
Anybody else have content questions? Flesh out the idea. I'm gonna throw my headphone in.
Mine isn't as much a content question as I'm just sort of curious. I know, so Bradford, I applaud your sort of, you ask some questions, you dive in, you surround yourself with a bunch of really skilled people who are just as passionate as you are. I wonder about like, just out of curiosity for this project, do you have like a time frame, or are you like not wanting to sort of hem the project in by a specific time frame, or is that required to be able to talk about a return on investment for the community?
Yeah, so on the project side, right, what we just described is something we call the design phase, right? So we think about this as like we're trying to design the community investment fund. And so the design phase has a 6 to 8 month project horizon. So we want to sort of get this research, get the real estate analysis, and get the structure ready to go in about 8 months. And then I think the question is how long does it take us to raise the capital to acquire the property or the land? And how long does it take us to raise the money from residents who want to invest, right? And I don't think we're at a place yet where we can say how long that'll take, mostly because we don't know the size, right? Like are we buying, a city block? Are we acquiring one property? We just don't know yet, but we'd like to have an answer to those early questions in about 8 months.
So sort of similarly, do you think that am I understanding correctly that then like the final, like the use of the building would evolve as part of that process as well? And like, what does that come out of your community work, or does it maybe if you could talk a little bit about how you see yourself coming to the place where you know what this building is going to be used for.
Yeah, there's an example of a similar project in which there's a purchase of a sort of a strip mall, and the uses are really varied, but they were based on what they heard from their resident sort of community survey, right? A lot of population serving businesses, a lot of really ethnic businesses. And so the question of like use, I think, is one for Clark-Fulton and the CDC. And through this community engagement process, it's not only, do you want to gain $25 a month of income, or, do you want to gain like long-term wealth? It's also like, what do you want to see in this neighborhood? And you finally have a chance to like make a decision about what goes up in your backyard. And so really hoping that we get a sense of like end use, and, always just in our work are really deferential to the community organization that's on the ground. We kind of intentionally at the fund take a step back in that way, because in many ways it's not our place. But know that, yeah, we are thinking quite a bit about end use.
It's really interesting. Anybody else have questions about the process, the project?
Yeah, I do. So what's the end goal? I mean, what is it you're aiming for? What's your target? What is it going to look like ideally when you're done, or at least,
Yeah.
what does it all look like? I'm just trying to.
Yeah,
I'm new to all this, so.
Yeah, sure. I think if you ask me, I'll respond. I think there's members of our team who would maybe answer a little bit differently. I would be really happy if we purchased a underutilized industrial building, or maybe a mixed use building. So there's some commercial space, think, diner, grocery, shop, maybe a couple of them. We purchased it, say, for $1 million. Half of that was from philanthropy. So philanthropy put in $500,000, and a private developer put in another $500,000. And instead of philanthropy, say, putting that money in the building, they said, I want to find, I don't know, a couple thousand residents and want to give them $1,000 a piece, $2,000 a piece, $5,000 a piece, I don't know, to put their own equity into that building. So it's a different way of grant making, right? So, if someone called you and said, I want you to invest $5,000 in my business, you'll get 5% of it. Very similar structure here, except we're talking about resident ownership of an asset. And then we would populate that building with a lot of really great neighborhood serving businesses that mattered and that were important to the residents. And then over the course of 5, 10, 20 years, rents would be paid out to those residents every month. And it might be $100 a month, or there might be a sale of that building and then they somehow get $25,000 or an infusion of $50,000 in cash.
So it's like a shareholder system?
Very
like
much
a shareholder system. Okay, so you're helping to invest and it's in your own community. So you want it there, and then, people want to take care of it and then have investment into it and therefore get paid back, by putting the money and the resources into building it as something that can build in wealth.
Yes.
Okay.
We believe that the neighborhood, in fact, we know that the neighborhood is appreciating, right, rapidly. And if you aren't a homeowner, how do you get there? How do you really gain on that appreciation? Got to own something. And we want to make that possible for everybody.
Okay, great. That's very clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah.
I did have a question about process, and I was sort of curious by Russ's question, like of ways to engage. Like I'm imagining, I'm putting, my teacher hat on and imagining in what ways high school kids can learn about number one, this sort of a project, but then be participants in the project where they are literally being invested in this process that is their community. At Teaching Cleveland, we talk a lot about just, the reason we exist is to get kids to feel a commitment to their community in some way, shape, or form. And this is like a literal way that they, maybe not a literal way because they're high school kids and they may not invest, but they could still be invested in that process. And so I'm just curious about thoughts that anyone really would have about ways that high school kids can be a part of something like this that would be meaningful and drive it towards its success.
Yeah. So I think one is going to be on the community engagement side around what should go there, what should happen, right? And so, we aren't limiting this to the parents of kids, right? We're saying like everyone has a stake in their community. And if we want to keep and retain young people, we're going to need to make sure that the community that, we build for them in the future looks the way they want it to. And so, what is it that you're really wanting in your neighborhood? I think that's one. How do I give some input on what goes here in the end use? Two, I think there's the more like, two, you turn 18 at some point. And the time money equation is pretty simple. The longer you're in the market and the earlier you invest, the better off you are. And so, how can this be an early passive investment project for people that isn't overwhelming, but is also like not as risky and volatile as, I think what you're seeing right now in the market, right? Which is crazy. Everyone's buying Dogecoin and crypto and AMC, and it's for another day. But it's how do we get some of that investor education early? And then, Greg, I'll tell you something. It's personal, to me, and why this project really matters. I grew up on the near West Side, and I remember when I was maybe 8 or 9, there was an article published in the Sun Times, the Sun Journal. So I'm not too young, Greg. The Sun Journal, and it was an op-ed, and it was someone writing in about property taxes. I lived with a single mom in a small apartment. We struggled to make ends meet, and it was describing a scenario in which renters weren't paying their fair share. And I lived there's not many apartments where I lived. And so I felt very exposed and uncomfortable, and felt like it was an attack on me. I told my mom was upset. And the only thing that made it worse was the next week, my mom wrote a response op-ed that described how, she was raising a son in this school district, and she participated, and she was a PTA person, and she did all of the right things, right? And that it was just an unfair characterization that, like, just because you're not paying property tax on a home, that you're not invested in your community. And so, I think that there is a real importance that we change the relationship between like community ownership and what it means to be like invested in your neighborhood for kids and their parents. And this is my op-ed, I guess.
Everybody gets to have one. It's
Yeah.
cool. But it is interesting to think about those ways, like, letters to the editor do feel maybe a little bit old fashioned or whatever, but there are those sort of real world, real time ways that kids can get involved in these conversations and make their voices heard. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about when you narrowed down on the racial wealth gap as the big problem.
Yeah.
How did you come to this kind of tool as the solution?
Yeah, that makes sense. So not how did we come to racial wealth gap as the issue we wanted to take on, but this particular solution to solve the racial wealth gap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer both of like the racial wealth gap is important because it limits growth, right? So like we can't be thriving when, you know, a majority of our population isn't, right? And it's rate limiting. We work on a lot of things. We work on access to jobs. We work on job growth and where jobs land, right? And so we've taken a pretty thorough approach to like all of the methods that, you know, create better systems. And the truth is like, they haven't worked. Like they haven't worked. The racial wealth gap continues to persist. And it only grows bigger year over year. And what we know, based on research done by the Federal Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve from our own hometown, Cleveland Fed, and like, you know, just sort of general consensus that like real estate is the quickest way to create wealth. It is the fastest wealth generator in American society. Most people make their money and grow their wealth through home ownership, individual property ownership, their own home. And then folks who really start to take off are folks who do, you know, sort of passive real estate investing or even active real estate investing if you take that on full time. So real estate is really the quickest way for folks to increase their, you know, sort of financial doing. And I think that there's also something to be said about like what we hear from neighborhoods that are growing, that like, it's a real problem that we think that like growth is bad. Like if what we're saying is that Huff or Glenville or, you know, any neighborhood that has been disinvested shouldn't grow or shouldn't get nice stuff because it will push people out, that is veiled racism, and it is manipulative. And so how do we fix that? Easy. We make sure that the people that you're afraid to push out gain on those benefits. That like, I lived in Ohio City, I lived in Hingetown, right? I lived on West 29th, and like, I loved $9 juices at Beach Jar. I got one this morning, right? I literally got one this morning. But if folks feel like they can't participate in that, or that the businesses that are around them and their rents are increasing, like it really quickly becomes a situation where like growth is not good. And like, yo, we like that ain't it. Like, that ain't it.
That it's like, it becomes emotional as well as financial, that you not only are economically excluded, but you feel like you don't belong.
Yeah. And so I think that it's like, we can get some capital people and we can make sure that we change this narrative. You know, our work at the fund is long-term and systemic. And even though I really want this to work in Clark-Fulton, what I really want is us to do things differently. I want philanthropy to operate differently. I want economic development to operate differently. I want us to talk about growth and gentrification differently. And so, yeah, it'd be cool if this works, but it'll be even cooler if that happens. So.
Would you, so here's what I heard as you sort of went through your steps, that, and like putting my teacher hat on and thinking about this as a teacher creating a problem or creating a problem-based activity for a student. So you talked about the concept paper, and to me, that feels like a problem identification place. And so you're sort of, you know, asking those who, what, where, how long, why, how did this happen kind of questions. And I loved what you said about the scientific method, because that, you know, you sort of threw it over your shoulder, but it's really very true, right? That like, that's kind of what you're doing as you're breaking this problem down, as your next step being an educated guess, that like you're creating a hypothesis and you're setting about a way to prove it. When you talked about building a team, that my teacher brain went to that idea of like creating roles within within a team or within a project. And I'm like looking at my teacher friends to chime into this conversation, but that's, you know, you have like the person who's going to create the slide deck, and you have the person who's going to, you know, do this research, and you kind of break it up into pieces that way. I love the idea of hiring smart people too. Like, I think, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about like looking for experts. Who are the people that you trust? Who are the people that have solid and important things to say on these issues? So I feel like there's a lot of similarity in terms of how a student might approach a problem to the process that you described. And I wonder if, you know, you mentioned, I know you kind of started with the idea of the racial wealth gap. It feels to me like this was all sort of put on the table by the Two Tomorrows, the report that the fund put out, you know, a couple of, what was that, 2018 maybe?
20,
something like that.
Yeah, it might have been 2017.
So that this feels to me like there is an iteration happening, that like so do you see yourself coming to the end of this project with a solution, or do you feel yourself coming to the end of the project with more questions? That was a lot of my brain kind of dumping this, but.
So I want to just respond to one thing that you said on the scientific method, like teacher brain thing. And like, one of the things that I would, I'm not in position to tell you all how to teach. But one of the things that I've always really been adamant about is like, no one tells you that you like don't need to do it all, right? Like, you don't. Like, no person could do all of those sort of line items, right? And so I'm just, I think about how I was when I was younger, or just like how kids are thinking now, and it's just like, identify the things that need to get done, and like, it's okay to find someone to go do those, right? Like, you can have, it's okay to operate with a, we say this a lot at the fund, like a top management mindset. Like, if you come into this situation with a top manager mindset that says, I'm here to solve something really hard, my job isn't to learn how to do it all. It's to learn how to find somebody to do it. And I saying that, it feels very consultancy and like McKinsey, but like, I really mean it. I really hate to think that people hold themselves back because problems are so hard. To the question, I think I have a solution that I want to be done with. My goal is to stand up many of these across Northeast Ohio, right? Like, I want to do this like 5 or 6 times. This morning, I got a call from a guy in Detroit who said, you know, I've heard about the work that you're trying to do. Can you give me your RFPs? And can you give me this concept paper that you talk about? And I said, sure. I sent him all of them. I don't care. Do it, dude. Like, do it. Like, just use it, redact it, find something that works, and build another one of these. And so, yeah, I think that there's a real chance that like community ownership models are real in the real world, right? And sort of outside of this philosophical stuff, like land trusts are common. Like, people like purchase pieces of land and like they do land leases, and they say like a community board gets to decide what goes here in perpetuity forever. Land trusts are cool. They're cool. If you guys are part of them, I don't mean to offend you. It's that it sometimes feels like it's like the lowest common denominator. It's like the easy one to go do, right? And I appreciate that. It's great, do it. I want us to figure out more interesting and creative ways that like doesn't just give people power, but gives people cash. And if we can give some more people cash, particularly Black and brown people, I'm cool. I'm good. I'm pretty happy with that. And I want that to be a real thing.
Jen, you look like you're going to say something.
I am. Bradford, I teach this class, which is relatively new, called AP Seminar, and it's a problem-based. Well, I explain to people as a research writing and presentation-based course where my students have to engage in real-world problems. And what I'm going to take away from your presentation tonight and share with them is, we just finished writing these argument-based essays around problems, and they're like, well, it doesn't solve the problem. I'm like, well, of course it doesn't solve the problem. Problem solving is super messy. Like if we had a solution, oh, sorry, someone just came back in from her walk. If we had a solution to the problem, we wouldn't have a problem, right? But the idea is to be inventive and to challenge the the preconceived notions on things, right? I'm not a land trust investor, but I love the fact that there's this, out of the box thinking, and you're just going for it. And that's what I think is so remarkable, and I think is so inspiring as well.
Yeah, thanks.
I think we're really bad at that as an education system of it's one of the reasons I loved teaching economics, was that moment where you get to say, yeah, I know those two things don't make sense when you hold them up next to each other, but they're both real. So how do you resolve that tension? Or yes, I understand that we just did all this work and we have learned a bunch, but we don't have an answer. Okay, yeah, welcome to life. And I think as teachers, we need to be better at that. We need to be better at living in those open questions and tolerating that ambiguity and that lack of resolution.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah, yeah. We are coming up on time, so I'd love to throw it out if anybody has other questions or further comments they'd like to make.
I was just gonna jump in real quick that actually they're having a big summer program for the kids, all the students in Cleveland this summer, and they're actually looking for proposals that are definitely out of the box, like something like that, where you can actually put something, not that I could, but this is kind of giving me ideas of just a different way to engage the kids, right? And looking at where they live, looking at their 4 square miles around their house, what's going on. And I like the idea, Bradford, where you said, what do you want to see in your neighborhood? So many of the kids I talk to, and I do teach a Cleveland history class, and we've had conversations about so many kids want to move out. Once they get 18, once they're done, they're out of Cleveland. Cleveland's got nothing to offer but crime and bad weather. Well, maybe you're right about bad weather today, but but that's kind of what I get a lot of, so anyway, it gave me some food for thought of maybe putting something together.
Russ, I would also just encourage you, I'll sort of plug one of my colleagues, Dominic Matthew. He's our director of transportation. He put together what we call the Paradox Prize. It was a $1 million prize to create transportation solutions. And it was really simple. It was no car, no job, no job, no car is the paradox, right? Wow. And so we asked people, everyone, just anyone, to come up with a solution for that. And we held office hours and we gave out $1 million to try to scale some of these concepts and some of these ideas. And so, we'll just encourage you, paradoxprize.com. Feel free to reach out to me or Dominic if you're thinking about how we've started to think about encouraging people in a really honest way to imagine solutions for the places that they care about.
Bradford, Bruce Ransom from John F. Kennedy. I could envision myself using this in a government class, possibly taking kids in the beginning of the school year, non-pandemic time, out into the neighborhood, having them observe what they see or don't see, and then dovetailing that into, okay, now what about that vacant lot over there?
Yeah, Bruce, where do you teach? What school?
John F. Kennedy High School.
Yeah. So the Opportunity Corridor, is anyone familiar with the Opportunity Corridor? So, there's a ton of vacant land all through that neighborhood, right? What too many of us call the Forgotten Triangle. And there's this, multi-billion-dollar transportation initiative to put a roadway through there. And there's still a ton of vacant land around Orlando's Bakery and what's called the Ruins. I think that would be such a fascinating place, Bruce, and in real time, like, the fund has spent about $1.5 million in land acquisition over there. We purchased land and then handed it to the city, which was, we handed it to the city. And, there's a process by which, we're thinking about what should go there, or the city is thinking about what should go there. Unfortunately, to date, it's been a police headquarters, which we know we don't need in the neighborhood, and potentially some other uses. And, if the big kids with the big jobs can't figure out what should go there, I trust young people to do it. And so I would be fascinated about what they would see when they envision that place. And if you're looking for a person to go for a walk with you, Bruce, call me. I'd be happy to join. It would be pretty cool.
I would also, Bruce, recommend 12 Literary Arts does a sort of similar, it's based in the design thinking process, but they've been doing a lot of work in Huff with their young folks, their youth leadership council, something, I can't remember the exact name of their group, but they've been doing some similar things in the Huff neighborhood. We'd be happy to connect you there too.
Okay, now I am familiar with Opportunity Corridor where it's located. You all are aware that my building has moved, right? This at 151st and Miles.
Okay.
Okay, because that's a little bit more of a walking thing than that. But I'm certain that there's some things around the Lee Harvard area that could use that type of attention. Okay, thank you.
You got it, Bruce.
Anybody else want to take us out? The last thought question?
I have a question just because I have a student that's going to eat this with a spoon. Like this is his jam. Like you would adore him. Every paper we've had to write, he's written about economic development. He's the most interesting 16-year-old I have ever met. So is this I know you said you shared your RFPs with the gentleman from Detroit. He's not going to want all of that, but like, is this housed somewhere on the fund website? Is it like somewhere where I can say, all right, hey, Evan, I need you to go read about this because it's your dream come true?
Yeah, the answer is not yet. We're thinking a lot about how to internalize this as like our fund strategy. If I can convince my staff that this is like what we should be really focused on long term, and like how we promote it as a central piece of our work, then I think that it'll probably have its own home. I'm happy to share individual documents, if it's appropriate. I don't know where this young person lives, but it's appropriate to get them involved in at least one of the stakeholder calls, just so they know how this stuff works. And then I'll make sure to share links when this becomes tangible.
Awesome. And then Greg and Aaron, you said this is being recorded. Will it be posted? Because I could start them there. Tonight's.
It will be. It should be posted by the weekend, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We're slow. We don't do these things fast.
Right. He's got like 7 AP classes. He's fine.
Well, Bradford, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you
Always
so
a
much for
pleasure
having me. It was fun.
Have the fund around. And this is our last learning lab of the school year, but please keep an eye out for our newsletter and you'll see when we start things up again, hopefully somewhere in person. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for a beer. So that'll be good too when we can get back to those places. Thanks everybody. Have a great spring, maybe kind of spring.
For sure.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. Take care. Be well.
Bradford, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a great night.
Take care.